All right, Spencer.
Let's do this
Appreciate
thing.
you coming on.
Yeah, dude. Thanks for having me.
All right,
Appreciate it.
so I know you're a psych major at SNHU.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. What got you into psychology?
Um, what got me into it? Honestly, I was doing business classes throughout high school, and it was kind of vague and broad, and it's like, business applies to everything, so I might as well take that route. I kind of have a business mindset of sell things for profit. It's pretty simple, but I didn't really have much direction, didn't have a vision, and I don't really have it wasn't something important to me. It was just kind of doing what I felt like I needed to be doing. And then, I had I wouldn't say mental health struggles necessarily, but, everyone goes through their stuff. So, I was going through mine, and I came to the conclusion that the best way to kind of figure all that out for myself would be go study psychology and how the brain works for the most part. And then on top of that, be able to hopefully apply that knowledge to other people's lives and help other people out. So, I just, I thought it was something that's very practical across the board for really anyone at any point. So, I figured it's a good baseline to start at and then kind of see where that goes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, no, and I know, we've had our psychology talks, and I've been waiting to get you on here for this very reason because, the way that, I think you and I approach psychology, and not even psychology in specific, but even just simply people's day-to-day actions, how they operate, how their actions affect their futures, and how their actions affect other people and their just you and I kind of click the way we think about stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so, I even more specifically wanted to have you on here because you bring an expertise version of, what I know about. You kind of know about it just a step further, you know what I mean? Especially from the books, and the research, and just this is what you study. So, I know briefly what we're going to talk about here is obviously yourself, and kind of we could just kind of did what got you into psychology, and also future plans, where you think you're going to take this, because I'd love to see you open your own practice at some point. That'd be awesome.
That's the goal. That's the goal.
That'd be sick.
Yeah.
That'd be sick. And really just how you can see yourself bringing value to really anybody. Like you said, you want to affect people's lives positively. And so, kind of segueing into the first topic, which you and I love this topic, so we're starting out fresh, accountability. So in specific, harnessing radical accountability and using that to your benefit, right? Because we've used the radical accountability in our own lives. So first things first, what would be your definition, your loose definition of radical accountability?
Honestly, I would say that it's a focus on what you could improve on as a person, not necessarily what you did wrong, really, or not necessarily blaming yourself. It's kind of just taking a step back and looking at ways that you can improve, because no one's going to make the argument that anyone's perfect. No one's perfect. Everyone makes mistakes here and there, so there's really no benefit. There's nothing productive about looking for someone else to blame and kind of externalizing the blame. And it's not really even about blame. It's just about trying to do things as well as we can. That's what we're all doing. That's right. All we can do. So really just looking towards yourself and seeing in which ways you can improve, because there's always going to be something. You're never going to do anything perfectly. Right.
And so I know one of the big things about radical accountability is personal growth. And so I think oftentimes people get confused when we talk about radical accountability, because first of all, the term radical has a negative connotation. But in essence, being radical is just being extreme. And in extreme doesn't really have a negative connotation. Now, it can sometimes be overbearing, but it certainly has its purpose in some instances. So for using it for personal growth, and I gave this example to you a few weeks back about the beach. I had my laptop in a bag. Somebody had put a drink in the bag, and it was punctured, and throughout the whole weekend, that drink was just seeping into my laptop, into my bag, into my iPad, everything. Luckily, nothing was destroyed, but, the first thing I thought off the cuff was, what the hell? Why did somebody put a drink in my bag with my laptop?
Yeah.
Then took about 20 minutes to get on the back road on the drive home, and I'm starting to think, I'm saying, well, first of all, nobody knew that it was my laptop bag. No one knew it was at the bottom of a bag full of sweatshirts and hoodies at the same time. Number two, it wasn't open. It was punctured. Nobody was to know that. But third of all, the most important one, what could I have done in that situation? And what I could have done in that situation was taking it out at the beginning of the weekend, but I didn't. And so, in terms of personal growth, that was a small personal growth moment for myself. Because I'm looking at it and I'm saying, yeah, I could have never predicted a situation like this. But what it did teach me is that whether or not you can predict a specific situation to happen, if you have something valuable, near and dear to your heart, take it out, put it in a safe spot. You know what I mean? And that even goes further than just material items. Like, if there is something in your life that you love and respect and appreciate, treat it well.
Take care of it.
Take care of it. And it's your job because it's your item.
Right. You can't expect anyone else to come jump in and save the day. And
right.
I mean, you don't want that because I'm sure that everyone or a lot of people can relate to when you're in a group project at school, when you're working in a team at work, whatever it is, and everyone's doing it the wrong way, and it's not the way you like, and it's not the way that maybe you think is right, and it's just like, all right, just let me do it. Like, get out of my way and let me do it right. Right? So you don't want other people to have control over your items. And, right. It's easy to get caught up in, man, I wish I had someone to take care of all my little crap, but you don't. Like, you want to be responsible and accountable for your own things, because whose things are they if you're not the one responsible for them, right?
No, exactly. And so, like we were talking about, the personal responsibility, I think, is the personal responsibility, and really in essence the personal growth is like the most important and substantial part of that. But how I view it too on the other side of things is that I also feel like I'm more in control of situations. So being able to, because the only person's actions that we can control truly are our own. So being able to find the blame, quote unquote, and I give that as positive a connotation as I can, being able to find the blame, the reason why this happened due to an issue with you or a problem with you or something that you caused. Like I said, whether or not there were a ton of external factors, and there always are, that are out of your control. But what was that one factor that was in your control that you could have taken advantage of and you didn't? And so, it does actually bring some peace of mind when you put your ego aside and realize that blaming yourself is not taking a shot at yourself. It's simply trying to find a solution to a problem.
Right. It's just perceiving reality as it is without the bias of your ego in the way. And like you said, once you push your ego to the side, it really is, it's fulfilling. It's a good feeling to be able to take accountability and just be kind of clear-headed approaching a situation. That's the problem. That's the hard part, though, is pushing aside that ego and being willing to accept the self-criticism, really.
Right, exactly. So, there's that, and I think, we kind of went over right there what radical accountability is, and, it really, like we said, it really comes down to just embracing that responsibility, both positive and negative. Because the other half of radical accountability, which I want to also talk about, is that really the best way to sum it up is your wins are your fault and your losses are your fault. So just as much of your losses and issues that you could have controlled and still happened, or whatever the case may be, your wins are just as much your fault. And so the idea of radical accountability goes even further to say, like, you are, in essence, in control of everything that happens in your life.
Exactly.
Everything that you go through, everything that happens in your life, you are in control of, whether it's good or bad. And so I think that's a nice kind of feeling to have and a nice way to live life, because not everything's going to be rainbows and butterflies, and we understand that. And you can't just pick and choose when you want to give yourself credit versus when you want to blame yourself. And so, you know, I give myself just as much credit for the successes I have, but more often I'm giving myself criticism, because more often than not, we're failing. And that's just reality. It takes multiple failures per success. Just like in marketing, it takes 1,000 letters for 2 leads. It's like it takes so much work for such a little return. But, once that return is amplified, you realize what that return really brought you. But at the end of the day, if all marketing was 1,000 letters sent out for 2 people to call you, you'd never do it.
Right.
You know what I mean? But the idea is that it takes a lot of work in the beginning to essentially succeed at whatever it is that your goal is. And in this case, it's just personal growth and bettering yourself. And like I said, it takes a lot of those failures to get to that success.
Yeah. And then, over time too, it becomes easier, right? Because when you do succeed, then you earn those privileges. Like, just basic example, if you're doing well at work, then you might get a raise and you might get a promotion, and then you are more monetarily equipped to maybe buy a nicer laptop, and you can your computer will run faster, better Wi-Fi, whatever it is. You can buy tools that make that improvement easier for you, right? And that's a privilege you earn. It's easy to say, well, I should just have it because if I had all these good things, then it'd be so much easier for me to do work.
Right.
Yeah, it would be, but you haven't done any of the work in the first place to earn those. And maybe you've done some, but if you don't have them, it wasn't enough, clearly.
Right. Exactly. And so, it's really like your perception of your perception of the work you've done, and not even the work you've done specifically, but really just your perception of what it is. I can't even figure out how to word this right. Really, I think what it comes down to is oftentimes I think we amplify our perception of situations too much. So we think of ourselves as, maybe too kind, or we think of and I don't mean that in terms of like we need to combat that. I just mean that in terms of, I feel like we're always giving ourselves an excuse to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, I'm always nice, so I'm going to be an asshole. No. First of all, you're not always nice. Don't trick yourself.
Yeah,
you're not always nice.
You could be nicer.
You could always be nicer. You're not always nice. But second of all, it's never an excuse. And just like I said, we're always trying to find an out. So it's, oh, you know what? I'm always responsible. So in this scenario, I'm not going to be responsible. And this falls into the category of accountability. You need to take accountability of your life, not just your actions, but your life in general. And if you decide that, you don't want to stick to the disciplinary actions it takes to hold yourself accountable to a certain morale, then, that's really your choice. But the whole idea, again, is like when you implement this type of radical accountability in your life where you have control over every situation, you're always growing because you're always criticizing how you do things, and you're kind of sharpening the sword of skills that you have. You end up becoming a better person.
Yeah, and that's just by default. And it's funny that you mentioned looking for excuses to not do the right thing, because that's very common. And I think that stems from taking things for granted, really. Like, people work for the weekends, right? Get through the work week. That sucked. Man, I'm so happy to not work.
Right.
No one's forcing you to work.
Right.
Like, don't work. Oh, well, so we get caught up in our individual lives, but it's ultimately counterintuitive. Like, if you're on a diet and, I've been good for 2 weeks and I'm going to reward myself by eating something that tastes good and makes me feel good immediately. That doesn't reward yourself, because there's never a good time to eat bad food. Right? Like, it's counterintuitive to reward your hard work and discipline to achieve a goal by being counterproductive to that goal.
Right. Yeah. See, I see that. That's, I think, one of the biggest reasons why addicts fail at sobriety is because oftentimes what I hear is that they say, I've been sober for so long, I deserve a drink. And it's like, when you hear it like that, it sort of, you can almost make sense of it.
Yeah,
I get
understand.
it.
You can understand
you understand what they're saying. But when you're looking for results, the idea is that that's just not a productive way to go about it. You have gone this far without a drink for a reason. There's been a reason why you haven't had a drink in 7 years. And that's because you can't handle it. So your idea that you're going to now celebrate with the thing that you can't handle, you're going to celebrate the lack of something with that something. It just makes no sense.
Right.
And like I said, so when you think about it a little bit deeper, you realize, okay, this is not very productive nor logical. This makes no sense. So, I don't think that, I think when we talk about this radical accountability, I also don't want to brush over the fact that, like, listen, we go to the gym and we hold ourselves to a pretty strict diet, I would say. But, the reality is I have Chick-fil-A here and there. I have fast food. I have ice cream. Like, I'm not like starving myself, and neither are you of these sweets or whatever. But we also know that if we're feeling like shit, it's not the ice cream. I mean, it is the ice cream, but the ice cream didn't force its way down our throat. We shoveled it down. Yeah. I mean, we allowed it to go in, well knowing that our body doesn't react well to it. Or if you're bloated and you're bloated because you ate like shit over the weekend, and then you get a pool party and you look like a fat ass. It's like, again, your fault. And now it's not to say that you shouldn't have had that food. It's like, hey, maybe you did deserve it. You've been working hard, you've been holding yourself to the diet, and now treat yourself a little bit. You absolutely can justify deserving it, but the idea that like two things can't be true at once. You can be the reason why you look like shit, but also have an excuse for it. You know what I mean? Like, it can be justified. Oh, I understand why you did that. But at the same time, you decided to do that. Right. So you look the way you do because of what you decided to take action on.
Right. The ice cream and the effects it has on your body is not concerned with what led up to you eating that ice cream. And
exactly.
The ice cream is thinking, he's been eating well the last week, so I guess we'll give him a pass. It's still gonna have the same effect no matter what.
You know what's so funny is that I just did a video. I haven't posted it yet, but I sent you the thumbnail of it.
Yeah.
The other day. Yeah. And it's about good debt and bad debt. I don't need to get into it, but at one point I say, like, or maybe it wasn't that video. It was a video where at one point I say, pivot and adapt. The whole point of the video was to just talk about, like, listen, there's always going to be people who are careless. There's always going to be mistakes made, and not even the people in general. There's just going to be problems that occur. And now you can go down one of two roads. You can blame the problem for the lack of success. And in this, I say you have a job to do, and you're expected to do that job both diligently and effectively, and effectively and accurately. So at the end of the day, the job does not care about whether or not you have obstacles, nor does it wait around for your solutions. And so the whole idea behind saying that was that, there are going to be problems in life. And this goes with the accountability. There's going to be issues in life. There's going to be people who cause problems in your life. In this case, I was talking about a job, so I'll just stick with that example. The job does not care that there were obstacles thrown your way. If somebody hires you to build them a house and, I don't know, the lumber all comes in wrong, the reality is you're still supposed to frame this house, right? Like, I know a story of a builder recently, and there was a framer who got the wrong plans sent to him. And so he built all the second floor walls like 3 inches short. Not his fault. But at the end of the day, he has a job to do. It was to frame that house. So the job's not going to reframe itself. It's not going to rip the walls out and reframe the walls a little bit taller. He has to take accountability, whether or not it was really his fault. At the end of the day, the job doesn't care.
Right, even if it wasn't his fault. Okay, it's not his fault. What are you going to do? Go track down whoever sent the wrong measurements and how there was a miscommunication? Because a lot of disagreements and problems are really just, a lot of the times, like, really malicious people who are out to get people is kind of rare. People just are careless and they make mistakes and it's all accidental. So if you want to go down that road, it's really no one is directly causing the problem consciously. So it's not like if you're trying to play the blame game, you can't just that's not how it works. It's not one person to blame for the most part. You know, there are instances of that, of course.
Right.
But I mean, even if it was, is it worth tracking that person down and then trying to hold them accountable and trying to get them to fix the job that has been done as if that's even a realistic possibility? Like, who's going to do that? It's just not feasible.
Right. And you know, for in business, oftentimes you do try and track down who made the mistake. Oftentimes it's like billing purposes or whatever. But again, it's like at the end of the day, the job still needs to get done. It doesn't matter. Right. And so that is honestly a good segue into the next segment, which is kind of talking about conversation and debate. So it's a little removed from it, but part of what we were just talking about is, you know, understanding people's various viewpoints and perspectives on things. So in this situation, now there's not necessarily two opposing opinions as much as there's two perspectives. One guy said, I sent the right plans. The other guy said, well, look, I didn't get the right plans clearly because now you have a different set. So, you know, there could be, again, one of two ways of looking at this. You could completely dog on this guy to everybody that you know for making a simple mistake. Or you could turn around, you could have a conversation with whoever it was and say, listen, you know, what happened here? Come to find out that X, Y, and Z was going on at the same time that he had to send these plans over to you because you were asking for them. And, you know, yeah, sure, it was his fault, but it's a little more justified. You know what I mean? It's like the idea of just this pure, like, quick anger towards people when there's a mistake made or just a difference of opinion. And that's kind of what I wanted to get into is the value of hearing other perspectives. And, you know, so I think that, and you and I agree on a lot of things, but I have some friends who we don't, like, take politics for instance, we don't agree on much in politics. But what I can't stand is when I'm around somebody who I disagree with and they're not willing to conversate with me. Now, you can sit there and disagree with every single one of my points if you want to. We all know that you don't disagree with every single thing I have to say, and we all know I don't disagree with everything you have to say, because we're all human. The reality is, you probably said something, if you're a logical human being, that I semi-agreed with. So I'd be egotistical to not admit that I agree with you in a various position. But the idea that, like, you will not conversate with me, number one, because you think that I'm more knowledgeable than you. That's usually what that screams. But if it doesn't, then it shows more just ignorance. Like you're not willing to even see another viewpoint and see the world from somebody else's point of view. And I don't know if you have this problem, but, you know, tell me if you have a problem oftentimes with conversating with anyone.
Yeah, I mean, you know, just getting into arguments and across the board. I mean, working at a summer camp right now, working with kids, there's a lot of arguments and disagreements, and you can tell when a kid, for example, in this example, but really, I mean, argue with your parents all the time, right? You can tell when they're trying to defend an idea and they're trying to win the argument and be correct versus when they're actually trying to understand the situation and trying to come to the best mutual solution, right? Because I think Jordan Peterson refers to it as being ideologically possessed. It's when you have an idea and you have a perspective on the world, on whatever it may be, any situation, circumstances, and you want to be right and you want to be correct about it, and you don't want to have to go through the mental effort, whether it's conscious or not, of thinking about it again and kind of honestly taking on a new perspective. It's because it is a lot of mental work, but so people will just defend an idea blindly. And maybe it's not blindly. Maybe they have some evidence to substantiate whatever their claims are. But no matter how confident you are in a perspective, in an idea, whatever it is, there's probably another layer to it that you haven't considered, because you keep, like, there's things are complicated, right? So it's always good to hear another perspective, and that's when in doing that, you're that's when you're looking for a situation, actually having a conversation of, oh, I didn't see it this way. Tell me more about how I didn't, and ultimately accepting and coming to terms with your inadequacies and how maybe I didn't view this problem as well as I could have, right? It maybe could have been a little bit better. But, it's very common for people to just want to defend an idea and they fight, especially in politics too, very divided. It's, people want to be right and they don't want to go through the work of coming to the correct conclusion and being able to actually substantiate it. It's just, you hear something online, you hear a cool stat that sounds good, and boom, that's it. Bang, over. But ultimately, no matter how confident you are in your perspective, your idea, it's just ultimately not productive, like we were talking about earlier. Take accountability and radically, even if you are saying something very reasonable and very sound and you have a lot of evidence and you have a lot of reason to believe what you believe, still another layer to it. There's going to be. So you can, and I'm sure anyone listening can relate to this too, when, you're talking to someone and you say, hey, and it doesn't even have to start as an argument. It can start as something as simple as a disagreement, or something like if you're a boss and your employee did something wrong and they didn't know, and so it's like, hey, can you just, maybe do this a little differently next time? That's fine. If they get defensive and what do you mean? Like, no, I did this right. They're not trying to listen and understand the different perspective. They're fighting and combating and defending their idea. So it's being ideologically possessed versus being open and willing to accept criticism and rethink your own thoughts and perspectives.
Right. And not to get off too far on a tangent with this one, but the other thing too is, a little side note to what you were saying, talking about the boss. I'm just going to talk to everyone. Everyone needs to start accepting authority more than they do now. Because, again, it's that ego in the way of us where we, whether or not the boss could be completely wrong. But the reality is, like, I hear laborers on the job squawking at their bosses, like, first month or so onto the job. And you know what? Yeah, the boss might be being a bit of an a-hole that day. But the reality is, like, and I'm not saying get stepped on. I'm certainly not one to, like, take people's shit. And, I will absolutely call people out when necessary, but there is a degree of authority that is allowed to be a little bit more of an a-hole. I hate to say it, but it's like, that's part of paying your dues, right? So I think the ego gets in the way of authority in any capacity. Authority of any kind. I think that we're conditioned to get defensive, and understandably so. We don't want to be wrong. But when you have authority in front of you, shut up. Right. Shut up. It does get to a point where it's like, okay, now it's time to speak up. There's always a time for that, but again, it's these entitled, I won't even get into that, but it's entitled people who walk on to their job expecting that everyone's going to pat them on the back every time they do exactly what's expected of them.
Right, the
barely even expected right? of them. It's like the quality of work. Okay. That's what I mean by tangent. I'm not going to get off it. But you know what I'm talking about. Just sit down, shut up, take your talking to.
Right, because there does come to a point where, and the lines, it's subjective, so the lines are kind of, it depends. But if a boss is telling you to do something and even if it's completely wrong, like, it comes to a point where it's not really relevant. Like, right. the topic of the conversation goes from what needs to be done to the boss told you to do something, right. Period. Like, that's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, within reason. If it's not going to harm you and the boss told you to go rip that door out, so you went and ripped that door out, and then they yell at you, it's like, hey, listen, you told me. That's the point in time where you step up. But you don't step up because you want to squawk in your little piece of logic. It took me, even where I'm working now, 8 months, 10 months before I even started. Like, I'd maybe make suggestions here and there. Now I'm a little more autonomous, so I make suggestions more often. But still to this day, it's whatever you want. Whatever the boss wants. At the end of the day, I might say, hey, I completely disagree with this approach. Completely disagree with it. And I'll be honest, but if you tell me it doesn't matter, I'd like it done this way, it's going to be done exactly how you want it done, whether or not I like it. Now, I'm not going to re-roof a house with no harness and no, with one jaggy ladder on the side of a cliff because you want me to. It's within reason, of course, but yeah. So, but I don't know how we got this far off of conversation and debate. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the conversation and debate, like I said, I think it's important in any facet of life to hear other people's perspectives. And I know you do this often too, and you've talked to me about, like, I guess here's a question for you. How often do you put your ego aside in conversations with people and acknowledge that you might be completely wrong, even though you're convinced you're right?
I mean, realistically, it's probably a lot more than I would like it to be. Ideally, it would essentially be always, really, because, I mean, like we were talking about, there's never any benefit in being stuck in your own ways and stagnating in your own thought processes, because if you're not moving forward, you're going backwards. There's no real stagnation. But for as often as I put my ego aside, there's I don't know if it would necessarily even be your ego speaking, but there are times where I will bring in my perspective and I'll say, well, here's the reason why I thought the way I did, right? And to kind of establish like a justification for my thought process, because I had to come to it somehow. And then should the person I'm talking to understand where I'm coming from, then they can kind of say, okay, well, here's where it could be improved. It's not even like where you went wrong, what you're doing bad. It's just where it could be improved, right? And everyone's got that. And then as they're telling me their perspectives, then I could say, oh, well, hey, actually, I did this. You're describing a situation that I experienced recently, and I did this the first time, and it didn't work. And then the next time I tried something else, and it worked a lot better. So it almost becomes an exchange of perspectives and ideas when the ego is dropped. Now, like we talked about this earlier, it's difficult to drop the ego because obviously you can only perceive the world through one person's eyes.
Right.
So you're biologically, you are biased towards your own self and your own ego. That's why we have an ego. So it's as often as possible, I try to put it to the side to understand other perspectives, and then I can kind of tap into it and say, okay, well, where was I coming from at this point, and why was I thinking what I did, and to kind of just get a better understanding of the scenario. But it's hard, and I mean, I'm human too, and I catch myself getting too caught up in my ideas and my ego, and no, I'm right, and just at work at summer camp, no, it's my way or no way, and I try my absolute best, more than just about anything, to kind of remain objective and unbiased. But it's definitely hard, especially when you've been doing it a while. It's a long day, it's been hard, you got a lot going on, whatever. It becomes hard because it takes conscious effort too, because your first instinct, I mean, as I just said, you perceive the world in your own eyes, so your first instinct is to perceive things your own way.
Right.
So it takes effort and conscious thought to put that aside and say, okay, what does this person have to not even teach me, but what could I learn from this person? Right. It's not that they're necessarily teaching you actively, consciously. There's always something to be learned, though.
Yeah, everyone has something to offer. Everyone has something to gain from. And I think it's cool, too, when you're talking about, like, the other perspectives of people and kind of engaging in that conversation that you may not want to have, like, because at the end of the day that conversation is going to result in you being in the wrong. And personally, I've maybe been so conditioned to do it now that I don't find an issue with putting my ego aside. I've gotten to the point where it doesn't really affect me much because I don't view it as a shot at me as a person. And I also look at regret like this too, and I think it's a great way to sort of sum this segment up is like you make decisions based on the information you had at the time. So I don't believe that in most situations regret is warranted because again, that decision that you made, if it had a negative result, you made it thinking it would turn positive with the information that you had at the time. So, I think you make a great point. Like you may justify in a conversation why you came to the conclusion that you did, if that conclusion was wrong. And, that's because you're sort of acknowledging like, listen, I don't regret the conclusion I came to because this is the information I had at the time. But again, two things can be true at once. You can be wrong, but you can still have the right intentions. And so you're not to blame in terms of being a bad person. It was a 50-50. You could have been right or wrong, and you were wrong. That's all.
And that kind of brings into the idea of unintentional versus intentional. I mean, to use a religious term, to sin. Like it's one thing to think you're on the right track and to truly believe it. If you make a genuine, honest mistake, still not good, and you're still gonna have to live with the repercussions of that mistake. But it wasn't malicious, it wasn't intentional. So those are the kind of things where, and if you didn't make that mistake, then it was bound to happen at some point because you learn from your mistakes, right? So you're not going to repeat that mistake again, ideally. So there really is no reason to regret making the mistakes because now you know not to make that mistake again. What there is to regret is the things you knew were wrong that you shouldn't be doing that you did anyway because you couldn't, for whatever reason it is, for any infinite number of reasons. Those are the things. And then, I mean, it's not like sitting there and slouching around and engulfing yourself in all your misfortunes and I'm so bad and I did all this. That's not really productive. So maybe regret isn't the right term, but
reflection.
Yeah.
Reflection. Healthy exactly. Reflection. I think the healthy exchange is just, listen, I was wrong here. My intentions were pure, but the results were not as assumed. And I think that's a perfectly healthy exchange from one side. And now, kind of moving on, because this is a good spot to kind of connect the two, is reframing perspectives on life. So, kind of the first topic in this segment I wanted to go over was life as a continuous learning journey. And sort of what you were just saying a second ago about how, where we always have something to gain from people. And there's always something to learn. There's always something that, we're doing right or we're doing wrong. We're constantly learning and we're constantly reflecting on our own lives. Now, I think we all reflect on our own lives to the same extent. It's a matter of how much power do we give to that self-reflection and how much legitimacy do we give to it. And so I think, and you would know better than me, but I think if I were to look at somebody who is constantly growing, succeeding, they're in business, they're always hitting their numbers and exceeding them. In life, they're always just, impressing people and people are drawn to them. These are people who are constantly improving and increasing any benefit and any positive they have in their lives. I feel like the number one trait that they have is just the ability to put more legitimacy on their self-reflection than others do.
Yeah. I mean, see where to begin. Yeah, it's so when you're reflecting on yourself, and it ultimately depends on the perspective, the lens that you look at it through, is how you're gonna interpret that reflection. It's easy to get caught up in whatever you're doing, whether it's, you're playing a sport and you were training for a big game, or, working for a big promotion, whatever it is. and it can feel like that goal, or usually it's a goal, that goal that you're working towards is kind of the end all be all. And then that'll put a lot of legitimacy onto that goal, onto that reflection, because when you're focused on, when you're hyper focused on that, and it feels like that is the all consuming situation scenario, I guess, then it's like, okay, that's all that's important, and that's just what I'm gonna agree with. But kind of zooming out and taking that more broad perspective and kind of understanding that, nothing's gonna be the end of the world. So it almost takes away legitimacy from the goal or whatever it is that you're working on, but and that's where you kind of get into utilizing different perspectives for your own benefit, because there are times where you need to hyper focus on one thing, and that's what you need to do to achieve your ultimate goal. But that being said, that if you let that one little thing tear apart your whole goal, then that's unproductive, and so you're kind of too caught up in your perspective of it.
Right. And I like that you were sort of talking about goals, and I think you're right, like putting legitimacy on self-reflection oftentimes I think is easier when you're a solution driven person. So when your goal is to create a solution, right? So take I think of an example of like a poor trait, but for instance, somebody who is always popping off, right? They're always freaking out over small situations, and it's starting to cause harm to the people that they love. Somebody with a growth mindset, somebody who's constantly hitting their numbers, succeeding, all the rest of it, they are the ones that oftentimes are able to look at the problem and say, okay, I'm hearing consistent feedback that I pop off in situations where I shouldn't, right? I let the emotions get the best of me. I freak out and get angry very quickly, and I'm very emotionally reactive. So I can go one of two ways. I can admit that that's true, but once I admit that that's true, there's no excuse that I should not create a solution for it. So here, my goal is to, since this is true, it is true that I'm emotionally reactive, I admit it. What I need to do now is harness my emotions. I need to find a little bit of joy in my life every day where I don't feel so miserable, so maybe I can have an outlet. I need to, find a way to filter through what matters and what doesn't. Whatever your solution is. I can't tell you what your solution is. What I will say, though, is that when you are a solution-driven person, things do not get to you as often, right? Like, because your perspective on life is less in the moment, in terms of like there's nothing more,
Right.
You know what I mean? Like because there's so many people just scraping by. They're just they're living, especially people living paycheck to paycheck. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Day to day. They know, and I've heard this a million times. Oftentimes it's the ones that don't have abundance or an abundance mindset. They don't think in the future. So it's so easy to get those emotionally reactive people in those types of situations because they don't have perspective on, like, listen, this is a bad thing that just happened, but I've been through bad things very similar, and I know it will pass in 2 weeks, right? Or I know it'll pass in 2 minutes. I know I won't be mad about this in 2 minutes. And, I think part of this topic, reframing your perspective on life and gratitude and sacrifice, whatever, I think the most important way to make sure that you're sort of a solution-driven person is to first reflect on your past successes when combating a negative trait of yours, but being able to look through an abundance lens. Like, listen, there's more time I have. There's more I not only have to worry about, but more that I have to be grateful for. But more than that, because I can't stand when people say, oh, well, when you're, oftentimes when you're sad or you're feeling down about, I don't know, you're not where you want to be, think about what you have. I honestly, I get the whole premise behind that. I think that's a stupid way to look at it. What I think you should be doing is I think that you should take a look at it logically and statistically and say, okay, I have been in situations like this before. I have been in a lull period at work. I have missed my numbers some quarters, but I always double my expectation the following quarter, or I always end up getting out of this lull period at an unspecified time. So, like I said, it's having that ability to look forward and say, you know what, right now it sucks, but I have faith that it will not suck.
Right. Yeah, and I like how you mentioned gratitude too and being grateful for it. And it is very easy to say, oh well, your life is good and it could be worse, which is absolutely true. And it's hard to do that. It is. And I think part of that is people forget that, like, I mean, not only is it gratitude for the position that you were born in the first place, and I mean, anyone listening to this, you have an infinite number of things to be grateful for. The capacity to listen to this, and so it's not only the gratitude of what's here and what's now. Like, you could have been born in the 1600s and out in some desert and been in a small tribe. And I don't want to demonize anyone else's lifestyle or anything, but it seems like
tougher.
quality of life
Yes.
is definitely better now. You're lucky that you weren't born 5,000 years ago and you had to go fist fight a saber-toothed tiger to have dinner tonight.
Right.
Like, so kind of to zooming out and taking that, and even if it's all the way back out to that deep of a perspective, it's, if you need to zoom out that far, then honestly that's ultimately what it boils down to. So there's no, life gets hard and there's tragedies, but the tragedies only come from when something good happens or falls through or something like that, right? Like, if you have a loved one and they pass away, tragic, and obviously justifiably causes negative emotion in a lot of it. But and obviously it's hard in the moment, and everyone has their reasons. Everyone has their reasons not to, but some people don't have loved ones in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, some people don't have people to care for them in the first place at all.
Yeah, it's that idea, and I mean this in the most, like, empathetic way for anybody who has lost a loved one, but it's it's not a good problem to have, but it's also a good problem to have.
Yes.
Because it's like, you know what? It's even when, you talk about, and I know because I'm just business, so that's the way I can relate to things. But, when a company's getting, too many marketing calls back from their leads, it's like, I can't handle all these leads. That's a good problem to have.
Exactly.
Right? It's like, I can't handle this emotion of the loss of a loved one because of so much love that I have for this person. It's like, I'm empathetic and I'm sympathetic and empathetic for you because, I've been there too, but on the same side, or on the other side of that same coin, isn't it beautiful how much love you were able to have for this person? And so, like I said, the ability to look at life through the lens of abundance, I have so much. And, the reality is too, what's the statistic? It's like 1 in 4 trillion that you're even born.
Yeah.
Like
right.
like that your DNA was constructed in the way that it was. It's like 1 in 4 trillion, or it could be 400 trillion. It's one of the 4 trillions. I don't know how many zeros are at the end of it.
A lot of them.
But it's a ridiculous statistic, and it's like,
to even be born, never mind to be born in the position that you're in, which
Right.
could be a hell of a lot worse no matter how bad it is.
Right.
Truly.
absolutely. And so I think, there is a spot for gratitude, but, like you said, if you have to zoom out as far as you need to realize that with the bad, you have the good. And I want to add this too, because I talked to my therapist about this, and she's always telling me the same thing. our minds have negative bias. That's how we're wired. We're negative bias because we're meant to survive, not thrive. And so when you're meant to survive and not thrive, thriving is has a positive connotation to it, right? It's abundance, it's happiness, it's worry free, and the opposite is survive. It's a lack of abundance. There's nothing. It's all in your hands to figure out. There's no positive connotation on simply surviving. So since that's how we are wired as I'm just gonna say it, Homo sapiens, like literally we are wired just as human beings to have negative bias because we're always in defense mode. It's not surprising that oftentimes when something tragic happens to us, we think we're the only one. That's number one. We think that we're the only one going through something like this, yes. Which is 100% of the time not true. 100% of the time. So that's number one. Number two, we view it as detrimental to our lives, when in reality, when you really take a step back and you start to formulate a plan and a solution, you realize that it wasn't a problem at all. There was no issue one bit, but you think it's the end of the world, right? So, and I can go down the list, and I'm not going to go down the list of just every emotion that you could feel, but the reality is that understanding that your brain is always going to focus on the negative allows you to realize that your brain is working against you, so you need to consciously look at the positive in order to combat it. And so it's work. It takes work. At the end of the day, it's not wired in your brain to do so.
I also like how you mentioned the survival versus an abundance, that kind of
we thrive.
Yeah, versus surviving and thriving, right? And you mentioned that, especially today's age. I mean, just surviving is obviously, that sounds terrible for anyone in today's day and age. Like, everyone has all these great things, and if you're just scraping by, just surviving, that is not good.
Right.
But it's also better than the alternative. It's better than not surviving, right? So it's negative, but it's only negative through the perspective that you're looking at it through. Right. On a complete zoomed out bird's eye view, if surviving's that bad, then you wouldn't be doing it. You wouldn't be fighting to do it.
Right.
One of my favorite quotes that I never understood for the longest time, I truly didn't, and I thought it was stupid. I think it's Dr. Seuss. It's don't be, or maybe it was Stan Lee, actually. One of the two, I think. It was, don't be sad that it's over, be happy that it happened, right?
Yeah.
And there's something to be said for, obviously there's justifiable reasons to have those negative emotions and to be upset and stuff, but ultimately, at the beginning, before all of it happened, and you knew that was coming, like, if you knew growing up that you could have loved ones, but they would die, you wouldn't say, oh, I don't want loved ones then, because I don't want to deal with it. You still want it, and you'd still put up with the negative emotions that come with them passing, but it's still overall a net positive, right? So even though it seems hard, it is better that it happened.
Right. So, and I think too, like, this idea that once we're in it, we would have rather it not to happen at all to avoid the discouragement at the end. So it's like, if you were to be told that you were going to be handed $10 million tomorrow, but by the time you're 35 years old, it'll all be gone. Every single bit of it, whether you spent it or not. Now, everything you spent it on is also going to be gone, right? So you only get to enjoy the 10 million for 15 years. Are you going to take it?
Yeah.
Or are you going to not?
Right.
You don't get anything. Like, the day you turn 35, it's all gone. Everything. You don't get to hold any of it. Everything's valueless. So are you going to not take it so that you can avoid at 35 the discouragement of it all being taken away? Or are you going to still take it?
See, looking at it from that outsider perspective, obviously you're still going to take it, and you're going to make the most of while you have it, which is essentially that's the antidote, right? That's what we're trying to do with life. You can be upset that it's gone, and I'd be willing to bet that a lot of people at that 35, at that point, they would just tell you, "Oh, I wish it never came. I wish I never had it." Like it just sucks not having it now. They're gonna tell you that. But looking at it from a bird's eye view, you can see why that would happen. You just have to be prepared for it. You have to combat that, and a lot of it is making the most of it while you have it.
Right.
You want positive things in your life, even though they might go away at some point, and it's gonna suck when they do.
Right.
And it's gonna feel like once they go away, it's gonna feel like, man, I wish I just never had it, so I wouldn't have to deal with these emotions. But that's you shouldn't demonize the good things. It's just the nature of reality that things don't last, right? And that doesn't mean that means the best solution to that is not to just not have good things. It's to make the best of the good things.
Right. Again, I keep going back to it. Two things can be true at once. You can be pissed off and angry that something was taken away, but grateful at the same time that it was there in the first place. So it's like, I hate that idea too, that you're at fault for some reason for saying that, you know, for viewing a situation like, now that I know that this is being taken away, I never wish I accepted it in the first place, or I never wish I had it in the first place. It's like, no, you can be sad that it's gone, but also grateful that it happened. It can happen simultaneously. So, yeah, no, I think that that's a great perspective to have on life. And again, I think this whole sort of perspective on everything we've talked about, accountability, gratitude, sacrifice, implementing a positive mindset in your life, cultivating a mindset for growth, all of this, what it really boils down to is balance, right? If we go to accountability, it's I was wrong and other people were wrong, or I was wrong, but there was also a problem, right? Or, cultivating a good mindset is about balance, right? It's like, I know the things that are good about myself, and I know the things that I could use work on. Or I know the things that I have, and I know the things that I don't. When you only have one perspective, only the bad, then oftentimes you're discouraged because you have no gratitude. But there's a problem the other way, where some people think that they only have the good, or they are only good, right? And so that's where now you get the ego, where people are too full of themselves and they think they can do no wrong, when in reality they're not always a great person, right? Like, and it really goes back to the whole idea behind nobody's perfect. But not only is nobody perfect, nothing is perfect. Like, your life in general is not perfect. The things that happen to you are not perfect. This is not, but also there's not it's not perfect that it's always negative things happening to you, right? There's not a perfect streak of negativity coming your way. Right. Never. There will never be any person who can ever convince me that there has only been negative things that have happened in their life. And so there's never a negative streak of perfection, a perfect negative streak, nor is there never a perfect positive streak.
And it's we chase perfection, and that's a good goal to have, and to try and create our perfect lives. But I mean, genuinely, if things were perfect, what would we be doing? Yep. I mean, like, really, like, what would there be? It would be, and I'm sure to anyone listening, it sounds wonderful to be able to sit back and sip on some wine, whatever it is, and just chill and have no worries in the world and be feeling good all the time. You would be bored shitless after a couple days. Yep. Like, you would create problems on your own. Like, we're problem-solving creatures, really. Yep. And, like, so without problems to solve, then there's no meaning, which is bad enough in itself. Like, you need meaning to sustain you through hard times. Right. And without any meaning and purpose, it's like, what do you do?
Right.
What do you do?
So one of the things that my mom has always told me, kind of going back to sort of like that whole idea of balance, really, is she's always told me, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. And that's one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten in my life, because the idea is that really the idea behind is anything can happen. Anything can happen. the very, very best result could yield in your favor, or the very, very worst result could work completely against you. So all you really have, because you have no control of the future, you have no control of what is inevitable for your plan. What you do have control over is how you view it and how you let it affect you. And so I think the best piece of advice that I've gotten is that exactly is hope for the best, prepare for the worst. And you know, that helps kind of remediate the stress of the lack of control. Right? It's like, you know what? I'm gonna hope to God that I have an abundance of time with the people that I love. But I'm gonna prepare for the fact that I'm not gonna get that. You know what I mean? And so
And that'll enable you to cherish that time and value it more. So, because if you think you have all the time in the world, and then that each second is that less meaningful, right? Because there's more of them. There's that many. There's that many more of them, and that many more excuses to not value it consciously as much as possible.
right, absolutely. So in essence, man, we talked about the accountability.
Yeah.
I like that, you and I've always agreed on accountability. I mean, guess where we're going after this? Going right to the gym.
Dude. That's fucking late, dude.
It's
like
late.
I got work in the morning.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't wanna.
Yeah, cry about it.
Tough.
Cry about it.
Tough.
And like the way we talk to each other at the gym too, it's like, I don't care that you're tired.
Right. It doesn't. It's not relevant.
I was there last night I got there at 9:30. I left at 10:30. You were strolling in at 10:30.
I was. I had to get it in, dude. I mean, I didn't get it in. Right? Yeah.
It doesn't stop. The grind doesn't stop. And I love that about you, man. It's like we've always connected on that, and where we kind of view life and really just the things that need to happen in life, like the non-negotiables, where it's like, you know what, I could waste time bitching about this. I could waste time complaining about the fact that, I don't want to do whatever. It's like, you know what, if you don't want to show up to the gym at those ungodly hours because other things got in the way, then simultaneously don't say that you want an Alex Eubank physique. I don't want to hear it, right? It's like, and that's really one of my biggest pet peeves, is when people start talking about what they want, but their life shows a completely different path to their wants. And it's like, you know what? It's one thing if somebody says, I want to be a billionaire one day. It's like, okay, that doesn't piss me off. But when somebody says, like, I want to get into real estate, what do I have to do? All right, here, X, Y, and Z. Nah, I'm not going to do it.
You must not want it that bad.
Yeah, then shut up.
You don't want it bad, and you may want it really bad. You may really, really want that, but you don't want it bad enough because you're not willing to do it.
Right. You don't need it.
Yeah.
I look at things like that as like, I need to succeed in real estate.
I need to hit the gym.
I need to hit the gym.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
But it's also, I get to hit the gym. I
Yes.
get to go to the
Right.
gym. You know what I mean?
That's gratitude, right?
And that's the gratitude perspective.
Because we are fortunate to not have to get our exercise in running away from fucking woolly mammoths chasing
Right.
us, trying to eat us.
Right.
For
Or
lunch.
walking 18 miles with a barrel of 50 gallons of water over our head because
Just to drink clean water for
Right.
the week.
right, as half of it evaporates on the way back if you don't fall and drop it.
Right.
So, yeah, it's that idea of gratitude. So, otherwise, man, I want to kind of wrap this up, but a little bit about you, because I know we briefly gave like a little description in the beginning of who you are. Obviously, you're a psych major. What are your plans? What are you looking to do?
What am I looking to do? I mean, for now, so I want to wrap up my bachelor's degree. I'm starting to look into grad schools. I haven't really probably given it as much thought as I should have yet. But I'm looking into grad schools. I think I want to go for counseling and then hopefully, do something, maybe not the traditional therapy route, but, in some way apply my knowledge of how people behave and how it relates to their mindset. I want to be able to apply that to other people because I want to know it for myself, obviously, so I can improve myself. But that's ultimately meaningless if I have it all to myself and then no one else has anything in it. So I want to be able to apply that. That's the long-term goal. For now, just kind of looking into grad schools, just trying to get those grades, stack the resume as much as possible. Yeah, I mean, just on the grind, trying to improve myself, trying to make myself as good of a person as possible, not so that I can be a good person, but so that I can promote people around me being a good person as well. So just working hard on the grind.
All right, so a little something that I like to do for every guest I have. First, I'm going to ask you a question from the last guest that I had on. They asked this question not knowing who my next guest was going to be. So this is a very general question. You answer it exactly how you want. And the second part is you're going to ask a question to my next guest, and you're not going to have any idea who it is. You're not going to know what industry they are in, if they're male or female. You're not going to have any background. So the question for you is, if you didn't start today, what would you think about yourself tomorrow?
Feel regretful. I mean, there's always going to be tomorrow, presumably. You're always going to have that later opportunity. I can do it later, whatever. I can push it off. But it's really a detriment at the end of the day, because we were talking about regret a little bit beforehand, and that's one of those things where there are things you know you should be doing, and if you don't start now, then that's justifiable regret, and you're justifiable in regretting not starting right now doing things that you know you should be doing. And I would not be happy. I'd probably be in a slump, and ideally I would start then. I'd start as soon as I realized, but judging by the fact that I didn't start today, the chances of me starting tomorrow are probably pretty slim, but definitely regretful, and hopefully I can turn that regret into motivation to do better for myself in the future. But definitely regretful off the bat, and then ideally more motivated to move forward.
Yep. I love it.
Yeah.
So, like I said, no idea who the next guest is.
I think my best question that really I think I could ask anyone ultimately, and it's probably the most important question, is what are you doing to improve your life? What are you doing to improve your state of being and your circumstances? Because there's nothing better to do but to be concerned with that ultimately. Nothing more productive, nothing that's going to benefit you more. What are you doing, or what could you be doing that would be benefiting you more?
I love it. That's honestly, that's a question I think that every listener can hear, and I think you can all ask yourself that same question every single day.
Every minute.
What
Always.
is it that I'm doing today to increase my potential for success, my potential for self-growth, and really my potential to just thrive in general? What am I doing to reach my goals? And to be completely honest with you, I think that if you either can't think of anything, right? If you can't think of anything that you're doing actively, or you can't think of something that is good enough to get you to that point, it's one of two problems. You have limiting beliefs. So there's a reason why you're not, because maybe you're insecure about, for instance, making content, right? I realized I needed to start making content for my business. It had to happen. In order to reach my goal, making content would be a part of that. So my limiting belief was the insecurity of not wanting to make content. So that's number one. Number two is you don't want or need it bad enough, right? I mean, reality is like my life and my destiny really lies on what I'm doing here, right? I feel like that's what I was destined to do. And so, it's one of those two reasons I believe that, you're not waking up and doing everything in your power to reach your goal. So,
and it's not easy. I mean, it's not going to be something easy. Otherwise you'd be doing it anyway. But
everyone should be doing it.
Exactly. And it's 100% necessary. It's worth it. And if you're not doing that, what better do you have to do? Play video games to try and stimulate yourself and make yourself feel good in the moment? You really think that's going to be the best route to take? You have nothing better to be doing. Go do something to improve yourself. Seriously.
Absolutely. Spencer?
Yeah, dude. It's been a
Appreciate
pleasure
having you on.
Dude, thank you for having me.